Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So this is going to be a multi-part series on using Firebase Authentication with the Composable Architecture. As usual, I'm not going to go too deep into the Composable Architecture itself. This is more focused on how to implement specific features that I did in the app Spriggling. You can go check that out. It's in the App Store if you want to download it and see all the features we'll be going over. And this first part, we're going to focus on adding Firebase to a project and creating an authentication client. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is add a new module. We're going to call this Authentication Client, and we will add a new target down here below. We'll just copy root for now and paste over it. And this will be Authentication Client. Not going to have any dependencies, but the Composable Architecture. That should be all we need. Next is we're going to add Firebase. And so at this point in time, Firebase is at 11.3, I believe. So let's go ahead and let that finish. And it'll import all of Firebase here on the side. Then we need to add our folders for our authentication client. So let's do a new folder, call it Authentication Client, and then we'll add a file with the same name. And let's switch over to it and just do a quick build. Great. So the next thing we're going to want to do is add a user object. So let's add a new module and we'll call it domain, and we'll add a new target called domain, and we'll give it the Composable Architecture as a dependency. Then we'll need to add a new folder. We'll call this domain. And inside of that, we're going to add a new folder and call it models. And inside of that, we'll add a new file called user. And this user will be, will hold what we return from our authentication call. And so we'll just make this a public struct user, and we'll make it identifiable. We will also make it equatable and sendable. And then we'll need to have a public ID as well as an email. And then let's import the Composable Architecture. And then we're also going to create a shared property for this that we can use in the app. And so this is basically just going to be an optional user that when we're authenticated, we'll hold this user, and when we're not, it'll be nil. Now we can finish setting up our client. So let's come back up to our client and go ahead and import our dependencies, which is a Composable Architecture, our domain, and Firebase Auth. And then let's add some state to hold on to our authentication state. And this will just be a signed in with the domain user or signed out. We're namespacing this domain because Firebase Auth actually has a user object as well, just to keep things clear. And then let's create our actual client. And so we're returning void response from some of these methods. And the reason being is there is an issue with returning just void in some test results. And it's being worked on currently. I'll paste a link to the discussion in the GitHub repository for Composable Architecture if you want to follow along. But for now, it's easy to just create a empty struct called void response and return that. So we have four main methods. This observe authentication state we will call when we launch the app, and it will basically just listen for changes to authentication state from Firebase and send a authentication state when there's a change. We'll have our sign up, our sign in, and our sign out methods, which are pretty standard for authentication. So let's go ahead and create our dependency extensions. which will look like this. And for now, we're just going to return empty user here in the authentication response. Let's give this a build, see if we get those errors to go away. Oh, looks like we didn't make a public initializer, so let's go do that. And that should clear up those issues. Let's see here. Just build domain real quick. And then back to Authentication Client. And those issues go away. Great. So before we start implementing these methods, first thing I want to do is add a new file. And we'll call this AuthenticationError. And this will be where we define like what types of errors we want to throw from our authentication client. Just give this. And well, right now we have invalid credentials, invalid email, user not found, and an unknown catch-all. So now we can go ahead and take a look at our authentication client observe method, and we'll go ahead and paste this in and talk about it. So the first thing we're doing is calling this add state did change listener, which basically will listen for any authentication state change for Firebase and call this closure when that happens. And what we're doing in here is looking to see if we have a valid user ID and email. If so, we're going to call the continuation yield with our signed in authentication state and create the user here. If not, we're just going to call signed out. We are grabbing a reference to this handle and wrapping it in this unchecked sendable. The reason is that this actually calls this method down here, which returns this NS object protocol, which does not conform to sendable at this time. So we are going to just wrap it in this unchecked sendable so that we can remove the listener when the continuation is terminated. Next, in sign up, we will need an email and password. So we'll do email and password. And then what we're just going to do is make a call to our Firebase auth create user method. And that just looks like this. And we're just going to pass in that email and password. For sign in, we need the email and password again. So we'll give it email, password. But we are going to do a little bit something different here. We're going to actually call this sign in method with the email and password, but we're going to wrap this in a do catch, because if we get the error from this call to sign in, we want to handle it a little differently. So Firebase actually can give us specific errors on these authentication calls. And so we can get this invalid credentials as well as invalid email. And if you'll remember back in AuthenticationError, we defined those for ourselves. So we just want to wrap those in our own error and throw that instead of the Firebase auth error. Really what we're trying to do here is, create a nice wall between Firebase auth and the rest of our app. We don't want the rest of our app to know anything about Firebase auth. We just want it to know about our own implementation of authentication. Similarly, that's why we're doing this with this domain user as opposed to just returning the Firebase auth user. Okay, and then next in sign out, we just need to make a call to sign out. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add Firebase to our project. So you will need a Google account, but once you get that, go ahead and sign in and go over to Firebase and go to Firebase console, and you should see a screen like this. And then go ahead and create new project, and you'll need to give it a name. So we'll just call this TCA Firebase Auth Part 1 and hit continue. We're going to turn analytics off for this. I will have another video tutorial in the future where we'll go over using analytics, Firebase Analytics in TCA, but for now, we'll just turn it off. Then click Create Project. This will take a second. Then just hit Continue. And it should take you right into your project overview. Now come down here to Build and expand that, and then click on Authentication. And then over here, hit Get Started. And this will add authentication to your project. For now, we're just going to do email and password. Go ahead and click that and turn this on. Make sure that's set to enable. Email link, make sure that's off, and then just hit save. And now we have added authentication to our project. You can go back to the project overview. And now we're going to go ahead and add our iOS project, our app, to this project. And so you can click on iOS here. And in here, it's going to ask for your app bundle. So you'll need to go back to your project and come up here to project settings, and then go to general. And this is your bundle ID, but you'll need to click on this little arrow here, and I just copy it and then go back to Firebase and just paste this in. You can give it a nickname if you want. This is all optional, and then just go ahead and hit register app. Next, it's going to tell you we need to download this plist, which we'll do in a second. Just click next for now. Click next. Here's some just sample code, but we're going to go over how to do this with TCA. So just go ahead and click next, and then click continue to console. So to download that plist, you come up here to the new app you just added. Click on this, and then click on the gear icon, and scroll down here, and you'll see this Google Service Info plist. Go ahead and click on that, and it'll download it to wherever Chrome or your browser stores your specific files. And then back in your project, you'll go to where that is stored. I have it right here, and just drag and drop it under app, and make sure it says copy files to destination, then just hit finish. And now this is your plist inside of your project, and it stores all the pertinent information to connect your app to Firebase. Now we want to call Firebase configure when our app launches. So to do that, first thing we need to do is go back to our package and add a dependency to root for Firebase so we can access it. And then down in our app delegate, first let's import Firebase core, and then right before we call did finish launching, we'll call Firebase configure, and this will do all the connection we need for Firebase right before we call did finish launching. Now let's go ahead and launch the simulator to make sure everything is working properly. Great, so you can see our did finish launching event was called, and we're on our home screen. Okay, so that's it for part one of this series. Just to recap, we created an authentication client with 4 methods, sign out, sign in, sign up, as well as a method to observe authentication state changes from Firebase. We have authentication state that's returned in those cases with a signed in and our own user, as well as a signed out state. And we created an authentication error to handle our own errors to pass down to the rest of the app. This is important because, like I mentioned earlier, this creates a segregation between our authentication and the rest of our app, meaning that the app shouldn't care if we're using Firebase behind the scenes or if we want to roll our own authentication service. It should just care that it's implementing the API we provide. So in part 2, I think we're going to look at sign up, so we can actually go ahead and work through the flow. And we'll create, tests for that flow as well. And we'll be able to see how we can do a little onboarding process as well. So if you like this and you want to see the future videos as they come out, please like and subscribe. Again, if you want to see all the features we'll be going over in these videos, download the app Spriggling and, check it out. Tell me what you think. I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time.